Okay, well, hi guys, welcome to ATX TV from the couch. You're joining us today for I'll Be Gone in the Dark, which is HBO's new 6-part docuseries based on Michelle McNamara's book of the same name. That book came out in 2018 and was a huge part of why the Golden State Killer was finally caught. So without further ado, I want to introduce our lovely panelists today. We have the production team behind I'll Be Gone in the Dark, starting with executive producer and director Liz Garbus.
Hi, how are you?
Welcome. We also have producer and co-director Elizabeth Wolff. Hi, welcome. Thank you for joining us. And then we have co-producer and co-director Myles Kane.
Hello, hello.
Hello. And co-producer and co-director Josh Koury. Hi. Excellent. Everyone looks good. Thanks for joining us. So here's what I love about this project. The fact that you guys all directed it. To me, the collaboration, what that means, feels like it speaks volumes about kind of the way Michelle worked in a lot of sense, and how she had to collaborate with law enforcement for writing her book and her investigation and everything. I would love to hear from you guys, and whoever wants to jump in first, please feel free, about what it means when you're co-directing a documentary like this. How do you divvy up the work? What does your collaboration process look like?
I'll start and everyone else can add on. And I think that's is kind of a metaphor for how we work, right? Like we're all kind of completing each other's sentences and working on this together. It's not an anthology series. So it's not a situation where Myles did this episode, Josh did this, Elizabeth did this, I did this. Everything is interwoven. So everybody's fingers and hands are on every single episode and every frame and every bit of audio. It was a truly collaborative process. And I think that, frankly, that's, when I've worked on documentary series before, like The Fourth Estate, that's really how I've worked, which is kind of bringing together people who have great talents, hopefully complementing each other. And then it becomes, rather than a solo performance, more of a quartet, chamber music concert of everyone working together. And I think your kind of comparison to Michelle and her process is interesting, and it also works on many levels because Michelle's book was unfinished, and there were the folks who came in and finished the book. Patton turned over her work to other folks, and in some ways we feel like we're kind of like almost the extension of that, piecing together all the bits that were left behind. If Michelle were with us, hopefully she would have, collaborated with us on this film. So it was truly collaborative, even to the point of, Michelle herself being such a big part of the storytelling, and her, the authors working with us really closely, the co-authors.
So how did you all get involved? Who started the process, and how did you all join together?
So HBO approached me some time ago when the book was in galleys, and I sat down with Patton and tried to, get a sense of, kind of what his intentions and goals were, and also like what Michelle left behind, what there was to work with from Michelle. And as it turned out, there was a treasure trove of material from, videos she had shot, all her audio recordings, all her investigative documents, all of which are part of the texture of the series. I brought on Elizabeth and Josh and Myles. I've been huge fans of their work. And that's how it all started.
So for you guys, Elizabeth, Josh, Myles, what interested you about this story, and how much did you know about maybe the case and maybe Michelle in general before coming aboard?
I didn't know anything. And I had the real privilege of coming on board before the Golden State Killer was caught. So I was able to read this book really in the stage where, really how most of the readers read it when it first came out. And, I was really struck by Michelle's story, and knowing that she had died, and the mystery there, and sort of what was the portrait of an artist as a young woman. And actually the true crime part was really something that, I thought, okay, well, this woman died while working on this material. Like, I was concerned about getting into such dark material. And then, you know, on our first day of filming in the development stage, as you may know, the Golden State Killer was caught. And I was just like, to be thrown into such a story with such momentum and to see all this new breaking material, like we were sort of hooked to begin with. So, you know, the forward momentum of that part of the story, as well as Michelle's really complex psychological mystery, really brought me to this.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and then Josh and I came in a few months later, still kind of early on into the production, just there'd been a few shoots. And so we came in, obviously having heard about this new twist, this amazing twist of the killer being caught. And, but that was about all I knew. And, but it felt like a really good fit. Josh and I have worked together for most of our careers on film, so we're very used to collaboration and really think it's an important part of the filmmaking process. So we were excited about that, but also just going in, not knowing exactly what access we'd have to the present day story of the trial, or, you know, what was going to happen, which was exciting. Just everything that was already on the page, which Liz and Elizabeth had developed in the original outline. There were just so many interesting sort of new approaches to how a true crime show could be thought about, mainly because it was baked right in with Michelle's perspective and sort of her being the center of this, and already having that perspective to sort of explore all this stuff through it.
Josh, do you want to?
Yeah, I remember thinking, I mean, one of the things that really excited me coming into this project, besides it being an amazing project and all those things, was the angle of the Golden State Killer. But it was, you know, hearing about how he was caught, but it's not because it was exciting or interesting that he was caught. It's because I remember thinking, and very early on we were working together, realizing that it was an opportunity to tell the stories of the survivors in a current day, which we could have done before, but it felt so much more relevant and important now because they had to relive these experiences in the public view, and it gave us an opportunity to tell those stories, not just what happened to them and how they dealt with it, but moving towards current day, which I think is always the most interesting part about documentaries. So it just kind of, I don't know, it would have been an amazing project anyway, but I think it just changed things in a really exciting way.
Mm-hmm. I mean, it's interesting that you bring that up because, you know, the craziness of this timeline to me is also something that I was really interested in, because you have all of this amazing archival footage, you have all of this research that Michelle has done, you have this book, but then you do, as you're talking about, have these things that are unfolding in real time. So whoever wants to jump in, I would love to have you guys walk us through the process of, do you outline what these episodes need to look like? Do you try to strike that balance of how much is it the past versus the present in the preparation stage, or do you have to let it unfold naturally as you're shooting and as you're editing?
It's a little bit of both. I mean, it was interesting, you know, in the development process, you do kind of an outline of what you think is going to be in each episode, and you know, we have a sort of thesis going into it, but part, I think, of what makes documentaries like such an interesting writing process is that you're constantly revisiting the story. And sometimes, like, you haven't looked at that original document in months, and it is constantly evolving, and you're growing with the new material you get, with the new opportunities, with the left turns, and coming, I think, closely to something that we had envisioned, because we had this incredible book. Like, we had this story, so we knew the East Area rapist story. We knew parts of this because it was a retrospective story, but then there were all these new elements of how we were going to braid it together. And it really wasn't until we were in the edit till we could, like, figure out this beautiful balance of all these different elements.
Mm-hmm.
And just going in, I mean, there's first off, there's so many interesting parallels reading Michelle's process, Liz alluded to it, her sort of deep diving into this. And right off the bat, I mean, we were kind of blessed with Patton kind of gifting us an incredible amount of her archive, all investigative to the personal. And that in itself was kind of almost overwhelming, but we knew it was kind of the bedrock of the project and would guide us, but it was very hard to know where and how. And it was kind of similar to her being overwhelmed by the case files and the billions of possible suspects. And we were very much in those early phases, just trying to keep an open mind, but also just being pulled further and further. There's, everything from her personal voicemail memos or interviews with subjects, her then recalling them in a car by herself, and these amazing things that obviously you don't get often in documentaries. And it felt so special. We had such an amazing team, archive team and associate producers, all kind of delving into that stuff and really mind melding with it. And it was so rich, but it was exciting because we didn't totally know where it was going to go. And it was an amazing just journey to explore. And it felt very intimate. I still have to remind myself that I never met Michelle.
And the book also is such a document not only of the case, but of Michelle's involvement with the case. The docuseries talks about how personal parts of the book are. So in striking that tone and that balance in the docuseries itself, what did you guys come up with in terms of maybe a guideline or some sort of just guiding principle for how to blend this very dark, sad story about the killer and the crimes with this still sad story about what happened to Michelle, but at the same time, this amazing spirit that she had, and to be able to tell both stories and give them both equal weight?
Well, it doesn't really get sad. At the beginning, it's all about her excitement and how much like being on this hunt for this, absent, terrible ghost over California excites her and motivates her. And in fact, it kind of lands her the success that had been eluding her from her career. So in fact, and of course she marries Patton and she has a daughter, and, there's actually a lot of richness and fullness of life. Of course it does get much darker, but I think the balancing act for us was always about the narrative, was on the one hand, Michelle and her narrative and her journey, balancing family, work, mental stressors, and the story of the Golden State Killer and the realities of the victims. And all of those threads needed to be constantly kind of interacting with each other. So even when the show reveals that Michelle has passed on, she's still very present telling us the story. And that balance, was important to all of us to kind of make sure was woven throughout every episode.
You guys touched on this about how you had so much great research and investigative materials that Patton gifted you from Michelle, but you also obviously did a lot of your own interviews and everything for the project. So I am curious, when you are reaching out and you are saying we want, maybe exclusive is the wrong word, but we want new footage and we want new interviews, we have our own questions. What is the process like to get these people to open up again about this thing that was so tragic and hopefully not the defining thing of their lives, but maybe could be seen that way if they do too many interviews?
That's a great question. And, I think that the fact that we had 2 years to make this allowed us to really take the time to get to know the women and the men that we interviewed. And we reached out to a lot of people. There were a lot of people affected by this case. And, obviously we couldn't interview everyone. And there were many people who didn't want to participate. But we developed relationships with so many of the survivors and members of law enforcement. And some of those people had direct relationships with Michelle. So in many ways, we were inheriting this relationship. And there were so many times that actually I had, Melanie is a citizen sleuth that you get to know in this series. And she would say, it feels like this is just a continuation of my relationship with Michelle. Like, I wish she were here for this. And it felt like an incredible responsibility to have so many people actually feel like we were somehow carrying on this relationship that they had. And, you know, when we do our interviews, like with the survivors, those are long interviews. We've spoken to them on the phone for hours and hours. We've video chatted with them. We've had the luxury to really build a relationship. And I think that comes out in the interviews.
Mm-hmm. And you did just use the word responsibility when talking about Michelle. And I am curious about that because, as you mentioned, I mean, she's not here to be a part of the project or to respond to the project. So what did you feel you had a responsibility to do when telling her story?
I think a lot of things. I mean, one of the things is that true crime has become such an explosive industry. And one of the things we wanted people to understand was how seminal her work was in that, you know, that she really was a pioneer, you know, because now it's almost like armchair internet sleuth is like a common term, but she was kind of doing this in such creative ways before it became a fad. And also her literary voice. I mean, she's such an incredible writer, and to be able to highlight that, exploit that, you know, whatever you want to call it, but really, you know, make it a central part of the storytelling was this incredible way she had with words, which also always showed such empathy and connection with the survivors, like Elizabeth was talking about, that our team then formed. And the responsibility is also, you know, she's left behind a daughter and a husband, and, you know, always keeping in mind that, and brothers and sisters, and always keeping them in mind. So I think all of those things felt like our responsibilities.
Mm-hmm. You mentioned, obviously, the appeal of true crime. But this docuseries really goes beyond the crime that is often the like sensational thing that attracts the audience. So I am curious what you feel the appeal of true crime today is. How much of it do you think is the crime itself and the sensationalism versus the ability for people to puzzle solve?
In terms of the sort of overall, you know, interest or the marketing of crime, you know, it's definitely something and why are we drawn to it? I mean, so it's something we've talked a lot about. And I know, and Michelle wondered about it. We found, you know, audio of her asking a lot of those questions. You know, I think for her, the puzzling and the bringing justice was an obsession and also a calling. I think for our society, you know, you can look at it from different angles. You can look at it as rubbernecking into others' tragedies and, you know, somehow feeling safe or, you know, voyeuristically enticed by those things, which is kind of the negative view. You know, there are people who talk about it, you know, especially women being so interested in true crime that, you know, women so often are victims, and that it gives you a sense of control, you know, to sort of be able to look at it and compartmentalize it and maybe solve it. And it's also like, it's an escape hole. And, you know, I think as Karen Kilgara says in our show, you know, it's like, there are ways that you can escape, and some of them are drugs and alcohol. And for some people it's true crime. You know, how bad is that if you're actually trying to bring justice? I've made a lot of films that skirt these boundaries, but this one I think is the one that really on in terms of talking about that obsession, what it feeds in us, what it leaves us wanting and lacking, and you know, so it's both about the thing of this case, but also about the wanting of knowing. And I think that's what was at the heart of Michelle's voice and her writing and journey.
Mm-hmm. So there's this really beautiful piece of the project where Michelle says she feels like she was born to do this. And obviously she's talking about her own investigation. But before I let you guys go, I would love to go around, normally I say around the room, but around the screen, and talk about why you personally feel like you're born to do what you do as a storyteller, as a documentarian. So maybe, Liz, we start with you, and then I don't actually know if we all see each other in the same order, but let's start with you.
I don't know. I mean, I don't know what we're born to do or not to do. I love telling stories. I love looking at the chaos of life and finding a shape to it. I think that's what the editing process of docs is, you've got these mounds of wet, mushy clay. There's a messiness, and you have to find inside that beautiful vase. And it's that process for me that is so enticing. I've also worked in narrative, and it's a similar project in the script writing phase, where you're taking, in the case that I've done, nonfiction and trying to find a shape to it that feels true to the story and also satisfying. And then I don't know about born to it. I think it's just a huge privilege to be able to talk to people, have them share things, go through these experiences with them, and then kind of, lock arms with them as you bring that out into the world. It's just an enormous privilege. And so I don't know about born to it, but I'm certainly glad that I found it.
Elizabeth?
I was thinking about your quote from Michelle, because I think Michelle says something else which maybe didn't make it into our film, which she said that all of her skill sets could have made her a really good lawyer too. So just to add to this point that, we're not necessarily born to these things. I have always been interested in nonfiction, historical stories, using real life stories from the past or near past to understand our culture and ourselves. And it's just always been something that I, was attracted to, from reading books in the second grade till today. And I like finding the truth in ourselves through real life stories.
Mm-hmm. So, Myles?
Yeah, I definitely think, again, it's been so interesting getting to know Michelle as a person and as a writer. And I do think I'm always interested in the overlap between nonfiction writers and as opposed to journalists. Like, I guess I'm thinking more about nonfiction work and how that overlaps with filmmaking. And I do think, especially Michelle did it. She's so, her writing's so kind of visual and evocative and empathic, and I do think that's what's exciting about. Because I've always loved telling stories in different mediums, but I think what's exciting about documentary is taking all these things, of course, trying to find the facts, stick to the truth, but there's a process of translation, of taking those things, which could take infinite forms and kind of trying to, like Liz was saying, taking all these sort of loose things that are exactly hard to find shape and putting them into some sort of narrative that will communicate something to the audience, like an emotion and a feeling. I feel like that's what literary work can do so well, is sort of paint the picture. It's impressionistic, but it's grounded by the facts in real emotion. I just think the medium is so powerful when it can do that, and this definitely has that in such a deep way.
Josh?
Yeah, same thing. I think that there's a lot of good points being made. I think for me, I started making, when I was younger, very young, 15, when I started making movies, I was really excited about narrative, and then I quickly discovered in college that, truth is stranger than fiction, and it's so important. And through the years of making movies and dealing with subjects and talking to people and learning more about their stories, it's been so rewarding to be able to tell their stories, but it's also, for me, been very illuminating and helped me understand myself more. And I think that's like something that, I don't know if documentarians talk about that much, but I feel like every time you make a movie, you put yourself out there, you learn so much about yourself, you learn something about humanity, and I think all of that is a real gift, and that's why it's it's an honor, but it's also like really exciting to do this stuff, even though it's a pain sometimes and it's difficult and everything that happens when you're making any sort of creative endeavor. It's so rewarding at the end of the day.
Can I add one thing just to tie it back to the beginning, which is, Michelle collaborated with a lot of law enforcement, and she had a lot of people she was talking to. But as somebody who writes and somebody who works on documentaries, writing is solitary and documentaries is such a collaboration. I mean, we got to go to work every day and work with, 20 plus people. And, these were dark stories, and it is incredible how much you can accomplish when you're interacting with people and doing it together. And I think that there was a great tragedy in getting to know Michelle's story for me, because I kept on thinking like, oh my God, like I wish she had what I had on this project when she was writing that book. And, would it have helped her, and would it have turned out differently?
That's a really great point. Yeah. Well, thank you guys for joining us today at ATX TV from the couch. For all of you watching at home, if you're watching, please remember to tag TV Together, hashtag TV Together, and at ATX Festival for future updates and announcements. And I'll Be Gone in the Dark premieres on HBO June 28th, and everybody definitely needs to check that out. It's 6 episodes, and if you haven't read Michelle's book, maybe pick the book up and read alongside watching. Thank you guys.
Thank you, Danielle.